Recording voiced by Ivona.com. Edmund Husserl, also known as Edmund Gustav Albrecht Husserl, was born on April 8, 1859 in Prosnitz, Moravia, Austrian Empire. He's a German phenomenological philosopher with main interest in epistemology and mathematics. Among his notable ideas are epoch, natural standpoint, noema, noesis, eidetic reduction. His influences are Franz Brentano, Karl Stumpf, René Descartes, Gottlob Frege influenced, Eugen Fink, Kurt Gödel, Martin Heidegger, Jacques Derrida, Bernard Stiegler, Emmanuel Levinas, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Jean-Paul Sartre, Max Scheler, Edith Stein, Rudolf Carnap, and Alexander Koyer. Husserl began his teaching career at Halle, initially as an assistant to the distinguished psychologist Karl Stumpf. Here, Husserl published his first research into the foundations of mathematics, Volume 1 of his Philosophy of Arithmetic, 1891. Following British empiricism, he tried to show how the foundations were to be found in acquired habits of thought. But, yielding to sharp criticisms by Gottlob Frege, he soon revised his opinions. He then pushed the question further back into the ultimate foundations of all rational thought. Gradually, he became convinced that the ultimate justification of thought patterns rested in the synthetic powers of consciousness, not in mere habits of thought but rather in indispensable concepts and relations, which, as underlying all thought, were seen to be necessary. These ultimate phenomena became now the constant objects of his tireless research. Husserl's focus was simply to study the nature of consciousness and how a conscious person could be conscious of their own consciousness. In this, he criticized traditional attempts to understand the use of language through experience, arguing that naturalism was of no value and that insight was the best method to use here. Through all of this, Husserl's philosophy was quite abstract and rationalistic, characteristics which would appear to sharply separate him from anything having to do with existentialism. He also advocated a methodology of detachment, standing back and away from human experience in order to better understand it, quite the opposite from the existentialist insistence that one engage as much as possible with human experience in order to understand what meaning can be created. So what do Husserl and phenomenology have to do with existentialism? The first place to look is in the reasons Husserl had for developing phenomenology originally. According to him, philosophy's primary goal was to provide humanity with answers to questions about how best to live and grow, but it had diverged from that purpose long ago. This, too, has been a principal concern of existentialism, the lack of a proper place in philosophy for human beings. The term phenomenology literally means the science of phenomena, and is based on the premise that reality consists solely of objects and events as they are perceived or understood in human consciousness. Thus, reality is not made up of anything independent of human consciousness. This is where another connection to existentialism can be found, the primacy of the human mind, or consciousness. We can also see where Husserl's phenomenology diverges from existentialism. For Husserl, the solution to the crisis of philosophy was to make it as systematic, as rationalized, and as secure as the modern physical sciences. He was inspired by the great strides made by the sciences in coming to understand the world around us, so he wanted to create a philosophy that would achieve the same for our relationship with the world and with one another. At the same time, though, he also criticized the natural sciences for their prejudice that nature is purely physical or material in nature, thus ignoring the role of the spirit, or soul, when it comes to direct human actions like valuation, judgment, choice, and commitment. Here, Husserl hoped that his philosophy of phenomenology would improve upon what had been done so far in the psychological sciences. In 1901, Husserl received a tenure at the University of Göttingen, where he held a teaching position for 16 years. Here, he developed his theories on phenomenology, a distinct school of thought that attracted many students. In 1913, he published the quintessential piece, Ideas, a general introduction to pure phenomenology, introducing his phenomenological reduction, an intuitive method of contemplating objects while observing the meanings and reflections the mind deploys to describe them. In 1916, Husserl accepted a professorship at Freiburg in Biscay. The manuscripts he produced while here were published after his death as volumes 2 and 3 of Ideas, though there were also many other projects. Critics pointed to the subjective nature of the results of Husserl's methods, prompting his response in the publication of Cartesian Meditations 1931, in which Husserl demonstrates how individual consciousness can be directed toward other philosophers, society, and history. One of the contemporary philosophers of Husserl was Martin Heidegger. In his work Sein und Zeit, Being and Time, Heidegger starts his investigation from the point his master had reached. Husserl had traced the elements of the world in their historical and psychological reality to the final state of ideal essences, which, in turn, should give us the explanation of that historical and psychological reality. For Heidegger, on the contrary, the existent reality should give us an understanding of the essence of reality. In his attempt to inquire into the nature of existence, Heidegger distinguishes two ways of living, the one, inferior, called the unauthentic, the other, superior, called the authentic. Unauthentic existence is an uncritical participation in the world as it is. Authentic existence consists in an analysis of self. Heidegger's existentialism is a valuable contribution to the understanding of individual life, but being guided by no spiritual principle, Heidegger ends with destruction and death. World War I was the background situation during Husserl's career. It is a military conflict that lasted from 1914 to 1918 and involved most of the world's great powers, assembled into opposing alliances, the Allies, centered around the Triple Entente, against the Central Powers. Husserl continued to work through his retirement from teaching at Freiburg in 1928 until his death from pleurisy in 1938. He died on April 26, 1938. The cause of his death was unspecified and he was cremated in Freiburg, Germany. Among his quotations are, "Experience by itself is not science. We would be in a nasty position indeed if empirical science were the only kind of science possible. If all consciousness is subject to essential laws in a manner similar to that in which spatial reality is subject to mathematical laws, then these essential laws will be of most fertile significance in investigating facts of the conscious life of human and brute animals." In a few decades of reconstruction, even the mathematical natural sciences, the ancient archetypes of theoretical perfection, have changed habit completely. Natural objects, for example, must be experienced before any theorizing about them can occur. Philosophers, as things now stand, are all too fond of offering criticism from on high instead of studying and understanding things from within. To every object there corresponds an ideally closed system of truths that are true of it and, on the other hand, an ideal system of possible cognitive processes by virtue of which the object and the truths about it would be given to any cognitive subject. Within this widest concept of object, and specifically within the concept of individual object, objects and phenomena stand in contrast with each other. Without troublesome work, no one can have any concrete, full idea of what pure mathematical research is like or of the profusion of insights that can be obtained from it. It just is nothing foreign to consciousness at all that could present itself to consciousness through the mediation of phenomena different from the liking itself. To like is intrinsically to be conscious. Visit Ivona.com. Create and download recordings voiced by Ivona Voices.